Quite a week of news, starting with allegations by several women against former CBC radio host Ghomeshi. Allegations of relationships turned violent. Now, police are investigating 3 of those claims. Ghomeshi denies all of it. But all this has thrown sexual violence and harassment back into the spotlight. And over the next 2 nights, we're having an in-depth conversation about it. Joining me now, Tasha Carradine is a columnist with the National Post. John Moore, a talk radio host here in Toronto. Stephen Marsh is a culture critic who writes for Esquire magazine. And Sandy Garasino is a social media analyst and former Crown prosecutor. We'll hear from them in just a moment, but first, some context.
Just held me up against the wall by my throat.
After years of silence, Lucy de Coutere went public, one of at least 9 women who allege their relationship with Ghomeshi crossed a line without consent. He claims the opposite. In a Facebook post last weekend, he said, "You will prospectively hear about how I engage in all kinds of unsavory, aggressive acts in the bedroom. And the implication may be made that this happens non-consensually, and that will be a lie." The story has started a national discussion about sexual violence and why so many women don't speak up. The latest data from 2004 says there were 460,000 sexual assaults that year, ranging from sexual touching to sex while under threat of a weapon. Only 15,000 were reported to police, and only around 1,500 ended in convictions. After a week full of headlines, Toronto's police chief encouraged women to speak up.
We would want to encourage anyone who has been the victim of sexual assault to come forward, report that victimization to the police.
So, Sandy, I'll start with you as a former Crown prosecutor. Why the fear? You've been in that courtroom. You've prepared women for prosecution. How aggressive can it be?
It can be extremely aggressive, but the fear starts long before that. It starts with a woman's doubts that she has right at the very beginning. I won't be believed. I was drinking. They already have internalized all the frailties that they know will be brought out in court. And then if they go to the police, all of these things have to be gone over with a fine-toothed comb. And if a prosecution goes ahead, once she's in that courtroom and it's all on her word, her evidence. This is not a he said, she said case, because the accused has the right to remain silent.
What have you heard? Like, just how aggressive can it be?
It can be, shockingly aggressive. I have heard questions put to a witness. I've had more than one case where women were attacked by intruders in their bedrooms while they were sleeping. One had a toddler in bed with her, and the accused said that there was consent. And the line of questioning was astonishingly intimate, questions that I would never imagine one person would ask another. But the issue was consent, and so we had to go there.
Tasha, do you understand the fear, where that's coming from?
I do, and I think it goes to a lot of what Sandy just said. It's not like you're reporting a burglary. There's a shame factor, a very personal violation factor that goes along with this kind of assault. And I think women make a calculation, and they say, do I have more to gain or more to lose if I report? And it sounds often that they have maybe more to lose if they can also make the problem go away, in a sense, by never seeing that person again or getting them out of their life. They may choose to do that, or they may say, well, I fear for my job. Maybe I work in an industry where it's very small and people all know each other. There's risk and reward, if you want to use that word, in terms of how they act. And I think that may explain why many women choose not to go to court, because they feel they have more to lose.
Seems like this is a discussion we've had going back decades, you know, about the shaming of women. Has nothing changed, Stephen?
Well, I mean, when we look at these situations, it seems like both socially and legally, you know, there's no advantage to women to come forward. We've created the situation where they can only lose by talking about it. I mean, we need them to come forward for our society as a whole.
But sometimes men do get charged with rape.
Yeah, I mean, there was an interesting article by Jill Amory in the Huffington Post about a woman who was assaulted in her, in her bedroom. She came forward to the police. The legal system worked as well as it can be expected to work. He went to jail for 6 years, and she still described it as, I would not press charges again. she's making a sacrifice for the rest of us. But we need them to come forward for us as a society. We need that courage for us to move forward.
John?
Well, we've told a lot of stories on my show this week, and certainly talk radio has, I think, been instrumental, and along with blogs of people offering their own stories. There was a woman in Montreal. Her name is Robin Flynn. She's actually in broadcasting. And she told us very graphically about two experiences she had, one of them being that she was in a bar and she went home with a group of people. She realized the whole thing was being orchestrated so she would be found alone with a man. He pushed himself on her. When she eventually got out and called somebody, they said, we should call the cops. And they did. And the police officer said, well, you were drunk? Yeah. You went back to his house? Yeah. And actually the words of the police officer, I mean, this is the person just supposed to take the complaint, were, well, men have expectations. And I think one other aspect that we've touched on is the shame. And Robin said to me, you know, I had to talk to my father yesterday before doing this interview so he would know about this, and I had to explain it to him. So there's that aspect as well.
Sandy, you're nodding your head. Familiar story.
Well, just about every aspect of this. Most police who are dealing in sexual crimes as experts, and most prosecutors, most people accustomed to the court system, I know they would think twice about having if it was their daughter, a close family member, I know they would think twice because they know what awaits them.
To go forward.
The woman's character is an issue, and she has to satisfy all possible frailties, and if she doesn't, the guy walks free, and the implication is she's a lying slut. That's just the fact of the matter.
I want to broaden the discussion here. There were a couple of incidents that happened this week that they're not examples of sexual assault or alleged sexual assault, but of a backlash when women complain of inappropriate male behavior. Check this out. A social experiment showing 100 catcalls a woman faced walking New York streets for 10 hours. Online, the actor was called a slut, even threatened with rape. And for other women calling out bad male behavior,
illustrates how the damsel in distress trope disempowers female characters.
The same violent reaction. Every time Canadian Anita Sarkeesian exposes sexist stereotyping in video games, there's a nasty backlash. Last month, she had to cancel a talk after the university received an email threatening a, quote, Montreal Massacre-style attack. Other video game critics have received death and rape threats online. So, Stephen, how does social media play into all of this, the sexual violence
Well, I mean,
sphere?
I think Gamergate is a really vital moment, actually, in our culture, because it's the moment where we're starting to realize where, like, any little debate of anything, even something as totally irrelevant as gaming journalism, I mean, it's hard to think of something less relevant, just creates this tidal wave of misogyny that's, you know, literally drives women from their homes. I mean, literally has this material effect in the world. And the question of where that misogyny comes from is a very urgent one, which I don't think there are any simple answers to, but we need to find them.
Tasha, is there more misogyny online than in real life?
Well, I think there is a certain bravado, if you will, because the internet is a very anonymous place. And I think that feeds into it in part, that people will say things when they can say them anonymously that they may not say otherwise. And this includes attacking women, making the kind of threats that you're talking about, because there's no risk to this behavior. And they're the sort of internet trolls you hear about all the time. You see them on Twitter, you see them in social media, Facebook, anywhere. People just lash out. And I think that there is a dark side to people. We're seeing there are dark sides to people that we knew nothing about. And I think people tend to perhaps act that out more when there's no risk of them being found.
Sandy?
Well, this is so interesting because in a lot of ways this may be a manifestation of the collective subconscious, the hostility to women, and especially what you see is the automatic assumption of lying and malfeasance on the part of the woman. On the other hand, I think, and I've spoken to one young man I know about this, and I think that a lot of, especially young males, have no concept of the real fear that women have. And I think that a lot of young people just think for them it's almost play. And they don't even really, I think, see a person on the other side of that.
There is a lot of misogyny, a lot of anger. Where does all this come from, John?
You know, and it's not just misogyny. I know that's what we're focusing on, but I mean, it's misogyny, it's homophobia, it's racism, it's all sorts of things. And if you turn to, again, I mentioned talk radio, but it manifests itself a lot in right-wing media in the United States. There is this anger out there, and we saw it this week with the video of the woman walking the streets of New York, that everyone's being told what to think and what to do. You know, Mayor Bloomberg is telling you what to eat, the gays are telling you you've got to put up with gay marriage, and now women are telling you you can't even tell a woman she looks pretty in a dress because that makes you a misogynist. So there's this pushback, this anger amongst people who think, well, I have no control over myself anymore because everyone's telling me what's correct and what's right. So I think that's a big part of the pushback.
Yeah, I don't know if I would blame right-wing talk radio for that alone. The people we saw in that video were catcalling. You know, they're just from all walks of life.
Defended them. Rush Limbaugh said that woman should learn to put up with a compliment.
And there will be people who will say that, and I would totally disagree with Rush Limbaugh. We can have a whole debate on that. But the point is that people who make the comments in the first place don't necessarily subscribe to that. They are people, as we saw on the streets of New York, all over the place. She walked the whole city, and that is so shocking that it's, you know, the everyday person that you wouldn't think would do this that would still say those sorts of things.
How do you read this, Stephen? What's this driven by?
I mean, I wish I knew. I mean, I think part of it has to do with the internet and the Geiges effect, the disinhibition effect of being online. I think it's part of being in a faceless condition, like not being able to see the face of others, which creates this violence, which, as you say, misogyny is a huge part of it, but it's also racism. And, you know, there's this study and there's this article in Wired this month about, you know, there's 100,000 people in the Philippines scrubbing the internet every day of hate speech.
But in terms of we're talking about in terms of sexual assault or in terms of harassment, and there just does seem to be a lot of hate towards women who speak out about this. Is that what?
Definitely, yeah. And I mean, I think
is that about power or throwing your weight around?
You know, again, I wish I knew. I think it's about.
Well, it's all your fault.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's about some kind of. I think part of it is some kind of innate violence. Horribly enough. I mean, I don't think I can come up with a different answer than that. Some horrible, innate hatred that emerges in a new form digitally.
Your head, Tasha.
Well, no, I don't. Well, what I wanted to say is I think that there's a root cause that is sort of larger than just these particular examples, which is, over time, women's emancipation economically, which has disempowered men to an extent. The sense that men would have control over women because economically there was an imbalance for centuries, and in parts of the world still a major economic imbalance. You can't work, hold a job, drive a car.
But
quick point, Stephen.
Oh, I'd just like to say, like, when you look at the studies, like, women rising to economic power leads to a direct decrease in the violence committed against them.
But not to say the violence.
So are you saying
that's perhaps that's
so? Is it worse? It used to be the women you're arguing are afraid of what happens in court. Is what happens in the court of social media worse?
I think so, absolutely. I think that, and one of the big problems about Twitter and Facebook and other media like that is that everybody has a megaphone, you know, so, and Slapdash69, who lives in some nowhere place and is actually a nobody, is as important as a commentator like Andrew Coyne. But why would you put yourself out there if people are going to hate you that much?
Any good news, though, this week in terms of what happened on social media? We saw a big shift in opinion.
Well, the hashtag, and I don't know how many people understand how hashtags work, but this is basically a dog whistle, a calling card that attracts thousands and hundreds of thousands of views, or in some cases millions. The hashtag been raped, never reported, and the unbelievable thousands and thousands and thousands of women who are now telling their story, and this is creating a tidal wave. There's a pushback. People have been, they've had it with feeling silenced, they've had it with feeling ashamed, they've had it. And to a certain extent, you know, there's a little bit of me that feels like, you know, if you want to be tough on crime, start right here, right now.
I can tell everyone has a viewpoint on that, but we are out of time. Thank you so much. We'll see what comes of this big story. We will continue this discussion tomorrow night on The National with a focus on what can be done to help victims of sexual violence seek justice.